Welcome to Leading from Being with hosts Marti Spiegelman and Todd Hoskins. Together they weave original human wisdom, play with language, and explore leadership and consciousness to help you create more thriving people, teams, organizations, and communities. Today they continue their series on landscapes, welcoming wildlife ecologist and author Simon Mustoe to explore how animals build the ecosystems we depend on, and why rewilding our minds may be the greatest act of restoration we can undertake. Stick around for takeaways and Marti's essay on potentialities about the power of awe. Get show notes and much more at leadingfrombeing.com.
Hello and welcome to Leading from Being. My name is Marti Spiegelman and I'm here with my friend and colleague Todd Hoskins. Hi, Todd.
Hi, Marti, and hello to our listeners. Today we're continuing our landscape series, and our guest is going to invite us into a different way of seeing, one that might challenge what we've been told about the state of our world. Marti, I will get us started.
Fantastic. Go ahead.
We live in an age of catastrophe narratives. Turn on the news, open your phone, scroll through any feed, and you'll find an endless stream of collapse, crisis, and countdown clocks. The climate is collapsing, biodiversity is plummeting, systems are failing, species are vanishing, and underneath it all, we're running out of time. It's too late. We've destroyed everything. Now, let me be clear. We're not here to deny real challenges or pretend everything is fine. Climate change is real. Species loss is real. Ecosystem disruption is real. People are suffering. The planet is under stress. We're not interested in toxic positivity or spiritual bypassing, that false cheerfulness that refuses to acknowledge difficulty. But here's what we've noticed. The catastrophe narrative has become so pervasive, so totalizing, that it's preventing us from seeing what else is happening. And a lot else is happening. In our capacity as humans to see the whole, we've become entranced by parts, specifically the parts that emotionally activate us, while losing sight of the larger picture. We zoom in on wildlife populations declining and miss the story of recovery. We focus on forests burning and overlook forests regenerating. We count species going extinct, but don't notice species returning, adapting, rebuilding their worlds in ways we haven't been watching for. This isn't about optimism versus pessimism. It's about whether we can actually see reality in its fullness. If we can only see collapse, we can't participate in regeneration. If we can only see endings, we miss the beginnings that are always simultaneously emerging. Life doesn't follow a program. It explores, experiments, plays with form. This isn't neat or linear. It's messy, wild, creative, alive with possibility. So here's a question. How do we know the world isn't in a state of being reborn? Not metaphorically, but actually, materially, ecologically being rebuilt by the intelligence of billions of organisms? What if there's a massive regenerative moment happening alongside the real challenges we face? What if humpback whales are returning to rebuild ocean ecosystems? What if wolves are restructuring forest dynamics? What if species we thought were doomed are recovering, not because of heroic human intervention, but because we finally stepped back enough to let them do what they've always known how to do? In our first landscapes episode, we explored how landscapes exist in constant fluid exchange between external territory and internal being. We shape landscapes and they shape us in return. At the heart of this series, we are looking at participation as something different than observation or seeking to understand. We read about nature, we watch documentaries about ecosystems, we study climate data. But are we in conversation with the actual intelligence of the more than human world? Maybe we're not listening to what the land itself is saying. We're listening to narratives about the land, most of which are written by other humans who might be separated. Today's guest brings us something different. Simon Mustoe is a wildlife ecologist, author, and founder of Wildlife in the Balance. He spent decades not just studying ecosystems, but learning from them, learning from the animals who build them, learning from indigenous peoples who never lost connection to them, learning from patterns of regeneration that happen when we stop trying to control everything. Simon has recently published a book called How to Survive the Next 100 Years, Lessons from Nature. It opens with something that should stop us in our tracks. When researchers reanalyzed the famous Living Planet report data, the one that said 70% of wildlife has disappeared, they found something the headlines missed. After accounting for statistical outliers, about 50% of species are actually increasing. 50%, recovering, growing, rebuilding their populations. This isn't a footnote. This is a radically different picture of what's actually happening. Yes, we have serious losses. We have species in crisis. We also have massive regeneration underway, and nobody is talking about it. Why not? Well, Simon argues the conservation movement has become addicted to the catastrophe narrative. Leaders are afraid to share positive developments because they think people won't act unless they're terrified. But the relentless disaster messaging has created climate anxiety in over 50% of adults. People aren't mobilizing, they're more often shutting down, or they're giving up. The negativity is not working, it's backfiring. Simon's previous book, Wildlife in the Balance, introduced a revolutionary idea. Animals aren't just residents of ecosystems, they're the builders. The patterns of stability we depend on for food, water, and climate aren't created by habitat alone. They're created by the behaviors, movements, and cultural knowledge of animals passing information across generations about how to structure a living world. The habitats include the animals, the plants. Elephants don't just live in forests, they create conditions for certain forest forms. Beavers don't just use wetlands, they generate entire watershed dynamics. Whales don't just swim in oceans, they fertilize and rebuild marine food webs from the bottom up. Even tiny animals like aardvarks, through digging the same paths over long periods of years, have literally shaped the African savanna. Animals are not decorations on ecosystems, Lego characters that we drop onto the landscape once we have built the walls. They are also the architects. And here's where Simon's work connects to our landscape series. We've disconnected our internal landscapes from external ones. We've lost the cultural connection to land that allows us to simply know rather than constantly study. We filled our awareness with mediated reality instead of actual relationship with the living world. And he proposes a paradox. The greatest obstacle to conservation might be the thing conservationists are most committed to, action. More doing, more programs, more intervention, more human control. There's something else I want to add here. This is not about humans being the problem or needing to disappear. As humans, we possess remarkable capacities. We've addressed that here on Leading from Being. We can recognize patterns across vast scales of time and space. We can hold past, present, and future in mind while imagining new possibilities. We can create global networks of cooperation while staying grounded in local relationship. We can use our distinctive gifts, our capacity for symbolic language, our ability to transmit knowledge across generations, our neuroplasticity in service of life's larger flourishing. We are also the stewards of consciousness. What we're talking about is awakened partnership, not human dominion over nature, not self-flagellating guilt about our negative impact. Conscious participation as distinctive members of Earth's living systems, using our unique capacities, not to control, but to support life's intelligence. Our job as humans isn't to save everything through heroic effort. Our job is to remember how to participate in the landscapes we're a part of. Today's conversation will challenge some assumptions about what conservation means, about whether human action is always better than inaction, and most fundamentally, about what it means to be human animals participating in ecosystems rather than trying to keep apart from them, trying to manage them. Simon, we are delighted to welcome you to Leading from Being.
It's lovely to be here.
So let's begin with the question that opens your book. How do our brains float above the planet's surface? And what does that air gap between us and Earth have to do with the way we see or fail to see what's actually happening in our world?
I recall a parent mentioning that their child had asked, what's the difference between plants and animals? And a lot of people had had a go at answering it. Plants photosynthesize, animals don't, all these sorts of physical characteristics. And I came in and I wrote a blog piece and I placed it out there. And I said it's actually the difference between plants and animals is that plants are rooted to the spot. Okay, plants don't have the ability to move. So one of the premises of my first book was to identify 3 mechanisms that animals use to drive ecosystem processes. The transfer, the amplification, and the concentration of energy patches and nutrients around the world. You might hear magpies calling, but a magpie just walked into the house as I predicted may occur. These animals are constantly moving things around, and the difference between, and now she's singing at me to give her food. They are intelligent, as you can tell. They interact with us. They are the key to building ecosystems because they can move things from one place to another. Now, so planet Earth, about 350 million years ago, suffered a mass extinction as a result of the rise of land plants. Land plants were so efficient at absorbing the sun's energy and converting it into waste that they polluted the oceans and killed most of what was then ocean life on Earth. Land animals hadn't really evolved by then. Subsequently, after land animals evolved, the energy waste from plants was brought under control. It was able to be hoarded, stored, sequestered, and so on. And it built this incredible economy, this ecosystem of energy that enabled more and more animals to evolve on the waste patches of additionally small animals. So you get this kind of pyramidal form construct. And so that was all perpetuated around a few million years ago. We had this incredible sort of steady, stable state system across the whole planet where animals were pretty much absorbing and producing waste and structure at equal measure across the whole planet at all spatial scales, and everything was pretty much the best it's ever been. And it was around about that time that humans evolved. So with that in mind, as human beings, as being an animal, like any other animal, and we share the same origin mitochondrial DNA as all other animals. The magpie that just walked in the room has a origin ancestor with me, which was 2 bacteria that formed an alliance a few 100 million years ago in the ocean. And we can move. And because we can move, we have to carry our intelligence with us. So trees and plants and fungi and so on, they don't do that. They carry their intelligence where they are. They form these mycelial networks and they communicate with each other that way. But we can only communicate through culture and language. So we have to move, and we carry this brain, which is an enormously energy-consuming piece of apparatus. And we've built this incredible body that's heavy to move ourselves around the world, and in the case of whales, even bigger, and move energy in enormous ways. Okay. But in order to know how to do that, in order to actually know where to go and how to operate and do that sustainably, because while we're doing it, of course, we're creating the systems we need to live in. We have to store all of that intelligence in our minds and carry that with us as well. So we have this gap between, we can jump in the air and we can create a gap between us and the Earth, which makes us extremely special. In evolutionary sense, the evolution of land animals as a collective consciousness was the starting point for everything that we currently understand about the ecology and ecosystems of the planet and everything that we depend upon.
Oh, that's really fascinating. There's so much there, Simon. I'm just having this experience of what you just described, what happened when animals came into being and us storing our intelligence within us. there's something, it's not a completely formed thought, but there's something I'm experiencing now. When humans first started to move around, our migration around the planet was a primary stage of our evolution. And I'm just seeing now that our early migrations in through your lens is our spreading of our knowledge and our capacities around the planet, like planting seeds, if you will.
And responding, Marti, to an opportunity and an availability. So there are those out there who guilt us into say causing woolly mammoths to go extinct. So I don't accord with that idea. I accord with the idea that there must have been something around that time where these large megafauna were actually causing more destruction and damage than necessarily the Earth could withstand or maintain, which created waste and created an opportunity for an additional species to then fill that void. And humans would have been that species at that time. And we succeeded not because we have some kind of intent to destroy. We were part of the creation process. We're part of the stabilization process at that time. Okay. Now that may have changed now. Maybe it hasn't, depending on the timescale we look at. But yeah, so I think our migration, again, I don't see these things as being we migrated because we could walk, but we migrated because the Earth system enabled that part of our evolution to become the most likely to survive at that point, and therefore we became prosperous across the planet.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at, is that the Western mind is kind of stuck in causality. We have to find a reason, if this, then that, and explain it to but I think what you're saying is that our lens isn't properly tuned to see the real reasons that things happen. And I think that a large part of what you're saying is we need to understand the actual biological and evolutionary function, not just of humans, but of all species in life on Earth.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And Todd, your introduction was absolutely remarkable, by the way.
No, thank you.
Blown away. And one of the things you touched on was something Marty just alluded to, which is that it's not just our intelligence that matters. In fact, one of the things that I find increasingly amusing about artificial intelligence, about AI, which is a complete misnomer, is that anybody who thinks that AI can come up with the answer to how we need to behave in order to save the planet is disillusioned. Is wrong, right? It's because, for a very simple reason, that, as you explained, Todd, human intelligence that is on the internet only represents a tiny microcosm of the conscious thinking that we've done and research we've done, whereas the subconscious thought of human beings is a much greater part of our intelligence that's more instinctual, and it's what enables us to make decisions. But that's not enough, because it's actually the intelligence of all the animals combined. So unless AI can interrogate the minds of ants and magpies, like the one that just came through the door here, it won't have enough information to be able to guide us on how to solve the planet's problems. And it doesn't need to, because we already have actual intelligence that enables us to do that in the form of billions and billions and quadrillions probably of species of animals around the world that are constantly acting like a ticking clock to just keep everything working to some degree, or certainly rebuilding and reforming everything that's going on. And they're doing all that through that, separated brain interface that they have that floats above the planet's surface, that just kind of moves stuff around and guides it. I find it's probably one of the most remarkable things ever. In fact, there was a time in my childhood when I was gazed at the stars with great admiration and wonder, and now as I get older, I'm actually looking now at what's beneath our feet and around us, and I'm looking with even more wonder and awe.
We like to play with language, learning from being, and I think there's room for us to explore this intelligence and knowledge. And we actually have not had a conversation about artificial intelligence, but it fits right here. As long as humans see intelligence as known about the world, So this thing we call knowledge, which is we usually reduce to infinite book, what can be expressed with language. We're missing out on the fullness and what is available to us as true intelligence, which is so much more than knowledge. But there's the play element here is that you refer to in your writing our capacity to know, which when we say I know something, we typically are not thinking about knowledge. We're thinking more of I know in my gut. I have a sense that this is the next step, or this is fruitful, or I'm drawn to this. That knowing we have kind of separated from the so-called knowledge. And I feel like we need some new language for talking about the knowing and talking about an intelligence that is beyond factual knowledge.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And we're actually we're working on a project at the moment to try to unlock this. And perhaps, Todd, there's the word of it. There's the need to have a word for it, but the other way is the need not to have a word for it. And so one of the challenges we've got at the moment in a project we're currently doing, which is actually working really, really well, is to try to, I say, kind of try and unlock that kind of subconscious thought. Now, most human beings, I think, actually work on a subconscious thought level anyway. And I explain this often with breakfast cereal. So I say to people, so you don't know how much breakfast cereal is going to be in your cupboard next Wednesday, right? You just don't know. So I could employ the greatest scientific minds in the world, and they could run experiments, and they still wouldn't know how much breakfast cereal is going to be in your cupboard next Wednesday, right? So when you go to the supermarket on the weekend, you go, oh, I probably better buy some cereal, right? Most of what we do is based in that subconscious knowing. I know I probably need to get some cereal this week, okay, because otherwise I'll run out. I might run out, okay? And that's correct thing to do. But in science, in the modern contemporary scientific method for conservation is to say, let's not do anything until we absolutely know exactly what's going to happen in future, which is completely illogical. Okay, so what we're finding is that if you actually get a group of the public together and you have a conversation with them, that the collective knowing of those people is often surpasses scientific ability of science to actually predict. Okay, and it's really fascinating on so many levels. Now, we run focal groups globally for some of the biggest political and economic decisions known to people, right? And we do it with groups of 6 to 8 people. So we're getting groups of people in a room, and we're supplying them with evidence to understand their place within an ecosystem. And what's remarkable, and I did a forum recently. There's a point at which things shift really, really clearly and obviously in a workshop where I'm presenting, and there's almost this kind of expectation that I'll provide an answer, and so the conversation goes down the room between me and the people in the room, and then all of a sudden something switches, and the conversations start happening across the room between people. And then suddenly it snowballs, and all this information flows out, and we're collecting and gathering all that information because they're discussing the evidence now about how they connect with the system, how the system works, how their relationship of their values and what they do relates to ecosystem features within the bay where I live, and so on. And then they come up with ideas.
Yeah,
so
Sorry. Yeah, you found a modern way to do what the elders have always known how to do. And it's one of the first things I teach my students. It's a little piece of neurophysiology. And the fact is that our human nervous systems, whether we are aware of this or not, we are collecting data from the world around us 24/7 through a radius of at least 5 miles. It's in your nervous system. It's in your brain. If you're initiated, it's in your initiated medicine body. We have it, but modern people don't know how to put their awareness to all that data. But this is how what we call indigenous people, I call it original human wisdom. This is how humans used to live. in relationship with the world. They simply collected data from the world. We call it listening to the world. And the world around them, their own environments, would tell them, do this now to do your part in the system. And humans used to say, yes, boss, and do their part. But we have, for a lot of complicated reasons, I think there's a dozen ways we can explain it. We, as modern humans, have pulled our awareness away from nature and come so far into ourselves that our egos are now trying to run the show. But what you're describing in your project, Simon, is you've created somehow a space where people's awareness is drifting off of themselves and into the environment. And for some reason, whatever magic elixir you're using in those spaces, their awareness is starting to pick up all the data that's coming into them anyway. So this is actually a technical thing, a technical shift that we can get some humans to make on the planet. Not everybody, but some humans. And we will, I don't know if we even need questions, because we'll find the answers. You know, I remember my years with Melodoma Somé, and he said his elders would always tell him that nature is intelligence as it stands. And they meant both the trees that are rooted in one place and the animals. But in their culture, they had trees that walked. You know, it was all, they were so deep into consciousness and their connection to nature. They were seeing into dimensions that modern people can't see yet. But the information is always delivered to us. And I think this is our big challenge, that we need to help those people who are ready wake up and re-experience their deep capacity to be informed by the world. And you were inviting us before we started, Simon, you were inviting us to disagree and throw in other thoughts and stuff. And this is not really a disagreement, but when I'm working with my students, and I think, Todd, you agree with this, I don't talk about subconscious, because there's nothing subconscious. The whole thing out there is conscious. It really is. And there's no collective unconscious. There is collective consciousness, which is all the known wisdom in our world and all the known wisdom in the universe. That's how the elders in South America talk about it, all the known wisdom. And we humans, as we engage in life and engage hopefully in a good way with nature, we are adding to all the known wisdom. And so we are in that way stewards of consciousness and stewards of collective wisdom. But if we step out of that essential dialogue with nature and all things energetic, if we step out of the dynamics of a living system and try to think our way into a position of control, then we have a way of disrupting that system to the point that it starts to reset without us. Yeah. It's not really collapsing, it's just resetting without us.
Or if as we interfere, it constantly resets with us, but it resets in like back. It like constantly resetting things back and back and back and back, and never actually allowing the complexity, because it's that complexity of the collective consciousness that it's required for things to stabilize remarkably fast as well. I mean, 5 to 7 years. You know, you can have whole systems reform and natural processes. I have a question for you, Marti. So one of the things you said, which really stuck in my mind a few months ago, was that humans have lost the ability to use the 90% of their brain that they need to make decisions. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, we haven't lost the ability. We've lost the skill we need with awareness. We don't use awareness well. How the way Indigenous people used to, and I think if you find a healthy community, they still bring their children up. But one of the first things they do is they take their children into nature and teach them how to put their awareness on nature, on the living systems, on the interconnectivities. They teach their children to experience being part of the bigger system. They lift awareness off the ego structure. And that kind of training helps a human experience, forget understanding and definitions, experience their membership in the bigger system of life. And humans need this training. We do not automatically have this.
What if we do, though? What if we do have it instinctively? See, and this is, it interests me. So there are three.
Well, we do.
Yeah. And I think that some of the three questions I ask at the beginning of every single forum I do, which I think unlocks this idea. And a lot of what I think what we have in our instinct built, if you like, built into our DNA, not that I like to use that as an analogy because DNA is very coarse, but is in the back of our head and it needs to be brought into the front of our mind, right? And so the three questions I ask people every single forum, and the first question I ask is, I say, do you on a regular basis go to somewhere to seek some kind of work-life balance and relaxation, right? So you walk in a park, go and play golf, doesn't matter what it is. Do you go somewhere outdoors to go and seek some kind of balance in your life? And I ask for a show of hands, and every hand in the room goes up. And then I say, okay, keep your hand up if you go to a very specific place that or places that make you feel good. And all the hands stay up. And I say the third question is, does that, so hands stay up if that depends on having a healthy ecosystem, having a healthy ecosystem, and all hands stay up again. So then I say, okay, on that basis, I want people, and I've asked a couple of hundred people this so far, because if they don't, their life collapses, right? So what we are doing with our projects, which is really exciting, is we're actually formalizing those questions we're for the first time, probably almost ever, we are connecting the community's values and needs back through specific ecosystem features, which means that by the end of this project, we're going to be able to, with the community's ownership of this information, provide a set of actions that the community has come up with to protect those and feed it back to government, which will provide maximum economic, but more importantly, social values back to the local people. So it'll enable us to track measurable change and positive change in people's lives and how how nature rewards them for their actions. And that is extraordinarily exciting. I mean, I can't tell you how exciting it is to be working in this space when, I suppose, we're going back to something Todd said earlier. Right? So 20 odd years ago, we were working in the conservation space, enthusiastically trying to save things. And then we went through this period of thinking everything was kind of disappearing. And then out of the other end, I'm like, oh, hang on a minute. Things are now happening once again, but in a way that's kind of positive and going in the right direction. And for the first time, I say to my colleagues, and I should point out, by the way, that my colleagues are the inspiration for this. Some of what we're talking about comes from the learnings that I've had from people like Anissa Lawrence of the Ocean Earth Foundation, people who are incredible mentors and incredibly advanced in their conservation work. And I've just kind of put various people together. And I've tried to understand how all of these things fit together into a bigger picture, and we can actually scale this and put it into practice. But it's incredibly exciting. I said to Anissa the other day, I almost can't believe we're having this conversation today. Like 10 years ago, I wouldn't have dreamed of being talking about Indigenous wisdom and collective consciousness and, all these things as part of a conservation program. It's remarkable.
Yeah, it's really something. And, it sounds like you're finding pathways to bring the wisdom into Western systems. And that's probably the beginning of our being able to change our systems, because Western systems are based in separation and too much rigidity in our frameworks. But nature doesn't work that way. So I applaud you for this. It's really, really wonderful. I know of a lot of groups who, my friends in Alaska at the Alaska Conservation Foundation, have developed whole programs where they simply turn the work over to Indigenous communities because the Indigenous people already know how to bring humans back into an ecosystem so the whole thing operates in a better way. And that's a big perceptual shift. It's not humans making it okay. It's teaching humans to participate in a way that the ecosystem operates to support humans and everything else. And I think that's a really big thing to understand.
And we obviously have a very strong Indigenous population in Australia, but also a very conflicted Indigenous population. Obviously, we're treated horrendously by European settlers. So there's a lot of difficulty in in piecing back together those relationships, the guiding principles, if you like, about what to do and how to integrate with nature, I think is really, really powerful here. And it's just very difficult to bring it in because there's so few Indigenous people that are so diluted within the ecosystem, and they're not very well resourced and so on. But we're very fortunate here to actually have a very progressive government. We have a government that's very progressive in terms of Indigenous outreach. And we also have a government who, to be honest, we wouldn't be doing the projects I've been describing if it wasn't for the fact that the Victorian state government has enacted policies and laws that are probably more further ahead than almost anywhere else in the world when it comes to realise living systems. We have the Living Yarra Act. We have an Indigenous Act of Parliament, bilingual Act of Parliament that recognises our river which flows into the bay here as being a living entity.
Yeah. It's, what I have come to is that I try to not use the word Indigenous, actually, because I think it's our word for them and it fosters some separation. And when I'm working with my students, I encourage them to understand that what we're talking about when we talk about Indigenous wisdom, we're talking about original human wisdom. And everyone is Indigenous to someplace. And that someplace that we come from put an imprint in us. Todd and I have had conversations about the power of the land where you're born. Even if you were there only for a short time after your birth, that land put an imprint in you. The land has spoken into every single human being on the planet. And we have that original wisdom of the land, and we have the original ways that humans could hear that wisdom and put that wisdom to work. It's primordial in every human. And I think that in helping modern people, westernized people, to realize that they can make a difference. This isn't something strange and weird that they probably ought to pay attention to but never do. It's human. And as a species, I think what we're all saying and what we're all feeling is that as a species, we have the capacity to remember our place in the great family of things, as Mary Oliver used to say. And that's really our responsibility. It's not something else. It's of humanity.
So the question that I'm constantly, as you could tell, obsessed with is what do we do next, and how do we enable this? And the books have become almost manuals. They're not. I don't write these books in a way to be popular. I write them because it's a way for me to understand and coalesce very complex ideas from many people I'm working with into something that I can then regurgitate out as a group to inspire the people we need to inspire to then take the next set of actions. And earlier I mentioned offline about this place Wakatobi, which I went to a couple of years ago, which struck me as one of probably the best example I've ever experienced of a perfectly run program like this. And it's not run by a conservationist. It is run by a guy called Lorenz, a Swiss guy who arrived in Indonesia about 30 years ago. And Wakatobi, this particular place, up until about 7 years ago, it took about 5 days to get there. And the first question he said to the local people was, "What do you need and how can I help?" And everything blossomed from there. So he didn't go in with saying, "I want to build a resort and I want to protect the reef."
Right.
Which is what a conservationist would do. They go, "We need to protect the reef, therefore we need to build a resort to get the money to protect the reef." Well, he didn't do that. He said, "What do you need?" And so they decided to work together. And wind forward 30 years, and I'm sitting with Lorenz having dinner, and as a conservationist, already walking in the room as a conservationist, he's on the back foot because. And I'm saying the wrong things, right? Because I'm making assumptions in the way that conservationists do, and he's like, "No, that's not how we work here." He doesn't want money from outside, doesn't need it, doesn't need the interference. Things are going fine, thank you very much, sort of thing. And so he gets people coming to him all the time with ideas about what to do, sort of top-down ideas. But he's built something from the bottom up. So today they run a entirely inaffordable resort, but incredibly beautiful resort. It's a luxury resort. There's about 45 staff on the resort and about 45 guests. So 1-to-1 staff to guest ratio. But what you don't hear about is the fact that Lorenz spends 90% of his day in meetings with the 17 local elders and villagers, managing the 440 people that live within the area that has now got 25 kilometers of the most pristine coral reef in the whole of the Coral Triangle. Mm. In between those areas, they fish. And now the other fishers are coming in illegally at night to try and fish those places because there's one of the few places there's fish left. So now they're working together as a community to put in rangers and to stop that happening. And so from the very word go, they've done what is necessary to survive by working together and having conversations with each other to decide what their next step is going to be. They haven't literally gone in and go, let's just form a national park. They've protected areas of reef of their own volition, and it is quite simply the most stunning reef plateau I've ever seen. There's nowhere like it on Earth as far as I can tell.
I think you're touching on something important that when I work with the elders who still initiate me, they keep saying that, you Western people, you're different than us. Your world is different. We can give you the wisdom, but you're the ones who have to figure out how it works in the world that you have. And my take on this is, they're absolutely right. Because consciousness does not change. It will always work the way it works. But what it produces is contextual. And we live in a modern world that has developed separately from our original human systems and our original membership in nature. And we've got Western economies that are, I always say it's like Bambi meets Godzilla, and Western economy is Godzilla smashing Bambi. We have a lot of
the other way around eventually, of course, it could flip.
Well, yeah, but we have a lot of imprint and damage done by the arrival of Western economies in indigenous settings. We're trying to bring together two systems that have grown apart. And what you're describing at this resort is some very, very intelligent, awake humans coming together to weave the two systems to create a third new thing. That resort is the third new thing. And this is a principle of consciousness where you bring complementarities, things that are not the same, but could complement one another, and you create a third new thing with it. And this is one of the biggest principles of consciousness that we need in our world. And you have to have an awareness of a larger system and larger forces. And you have to have an awareness of the other things that are different from you. And you have to have the receptivity and the open-heartedness to sit down and bring all that together and see what you create. Beautiful.
And so it speaks to everything you just said. At this point, I wanted to mention that. So this is one of these humbling truths I love to throw in, and I think in relation to this sort of this Godzilla Bambi idea, and this idea that Western culture is the Godzilla stamping over Bambi. I don't necessarily see it like that. I see it more like the school bully. So, with Mike Gaggett's come up at some point. So one of the things that I think I'd like all your listeners to think about is two things, and I can hear scientists running to the hills when I say this. But the first humbling truth is this: that animals are the only entities in the known universe that have the agency to change the environment they live in. Okay, we can make decisions to literally change the world around us. Okay, but nothing we do has any bearing on the outcome whatsoever. Now, this is the ultimate life paradox, and it doesn't sit well with modern scientific thought. Okay, that whatever we do, both individually and really collectively as a group, cannot guarantee any outcome, even though we're the only people with the agency to create an outcome. and that, I think, is a really important thing to understand. And once you can understand it, you can actually make sense of it. And there is a pathway through that. And the second humbling truth is that everything we do is in some measure both right and wrong at the same time. So I have scientists say this is in modern science, we're looking for these kind of magic bullet solutions which we can roll out across an entire area, whether it be capitalism or communism, or whether it be pest management or dealing with or reforestation or climate. Everyone's wants to come up with the single answer that we can put across the whole planet, and it will solve everyone's problems. And so there's this humbling modesty that we have to refine within ourselves to say that one way of putting this is we have to do as much as we can for the right reasons all the time. And as long as what we're doing is authentic, I'd like to talk about that a bit more in a moment as well, that we're probably going in the right direction. But we have to understand that as a Western society, we don't have the answers. So, and much of what I write about in these days is the idea that, so then people go, well, then there's no point in doing anything. And you go, actually, no, that's not the case, because you can actually make judgments based on cultural intent, based on community collective consciousness, that put you in a pathway to restoring diversity, to restoring balance, to restoring predictability in natural processes. You can actually re-enable your connection and enable, in the same way as Wakatobi has done. You haven't gone out and said, we will take this action to force this outcome. You've instead altered your own behavior to enable yourself to thrive, and the ecosystem has given back in kind. And that's the direction we need to be going in. And so there's a really simple solution to this, really simple. And all it takes is a little bit of modesty to get there. But that is, you mentioned earlier, it's lacking because ego does get in the way. But I don't think it's necessarily just ego. I think we've been kind of taught the wrong way to think.
We have. Yeah, we have. Yeah, beautiful.
And that's why I love talking to you guys about this, because there's few people who get this, and a lot of people are uncomfortable with this idea.
Yeah,
I very much appreciate the humility that is necessary for us to be effective as humans. I do wish that we could get beyond both the predetermination, the need to determine outcomes, and the determining what is right and wrong. And I'm not saying there is no right or wrong. There are things dying and thriving and living and being born, and all of this is happening at the same time. And it all impacts one another, and it's all a part of life. We get obsessed with not only what is right and wrong, but what is right action. And instead of looking at, are we attuned and open and aware of the world around us so that we are in a state that our actions are connected to life.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah, that's where I'll start to try to help people understand. If your awareness is on yourself, you end up with, is this right or wrong? What should I do? But if your awareness is well woven into the world around you, the world is telling you. The system you're part of is informing you. And then decisions are easy, and they are, quote unquote, correct. In other words, they're additive, they're life positive, system positive decisions. And I think, Simon, you're making a really, really good point. There isn't an answer. Any living system in any given moment could be completely fine with any number of different inputs and solutions and decisions and so on. We're looking at the difference between thinking about and trying to control versus actually just giving up and participating.
But then when it comes to making decisions about conservation of society, we do something completely different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Makes no sense.
I do want to take you up on your offer of disagreeing with you, but I'm not sure I actually disagree with you, because based upon what you've shared over the last 40 minutes or so, when we talk about action or inaction, and I understand the point that you've written, that we can become obsessed with intervention and we know best as humans, but inaction I have a problem with. based upon what you said, I don't think you are a supporter of inaction. And I'm thinking about Tom Brown Jr., who just passed away a year ago, whose end of his life, he was this expert tracker and ran this tracking school and taught people to track, was saying that these sensory capacities that we have, we can use to heal the world. And Tom Brown Jr.'s language would be a little different than mine. And what I would say is that if we are in that state of being, of connected to the world, of connected to life, we can trust that when we take actions, it's going to be in support of life. And we need to stop the calculated human intervention that is divorced from being connected to life as that being action, and instead the multitude of small and large and all actions, individual up to collective, that are not about saving the planet, but they're about protecting, nurturing, and being a part of life, participating with life. And that's action that I feel very strongly that we need. It's just more difficult to talk about than putting together a program or a resort or a Save the Reef campaign.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I got to throw something in here. This is so brilliant because I think we're kind of walking around what does action actually mean. And I want to remind everybody of what the Yaquis say in central Mexico, that the core of our being human is the act of perception, which means knowing the world through the senses. The core of our being is the act of perception. The magic of our being human is the act of awareness. So simply realizing that you know the world through the senses, and language comes way later. You know when to buy your breakfast cereal. You don't need to think a thought. If people could understand that, experience that a little bit, that is taking action. That is participating, allowing yourself to be informed. So I think the three of us have come to maybe a point where we're realizing we're trying to help people understand what taking action actually means.
And so I've been giving us a fair bit of thought the last few days. So Todd, actually, I should say, Todd. So yes, it's not so much inaction as there's a couple of things. In the first book, I talked about doing less to achieve more. So actually just slowing down and not worrying so much about things. And, so rather than constantly being told you have to take these actions to not feel guilty about the environment, don't worry about that. Just carry on doing what you're doing and just try and do it a bit better. We're very careful in the conservation projects I run. I say to the community, I say, look, I don't want you to feel like you need to do more. Like if you want to do lots, that's fine. If you only have time to drop in occasionally and see how things are going, and that's fine too. Like if you might be a doctor or a teacher, you're far too busy doing something really important already, which is part of the system anyhow. You don't need to be pulling weeds at the weekend, right? This is about changing the dynamic of the overall community we live in. So, generally speaking, in an ecosystem in an evolutionary sense, as soon as half or more of a population starts to think or behave a certain way, things shift, right? So we live on a planet right now that's highly stressed, as you mentioned earlier, Todd. And the system, as Marti mentioned, is way more powerful than anything that we've built economically as human beings, and it operates from the outside in. So it's forcing outcomes on us. And a lot about what I've written in the latest book is about understanding that much of what we decide, much of the decisions we make actually aren't being made by us necessarily consciously. Some of them are being forced by our interaction with other animals. There was an amazing paper that came out a few weeks ago in Australia that shows that 30% of animals considered to be at risk moving towards the heat, not away from it. And they're saying this is because of complex system interactions with other species, that the system's already adapting very fast to this new climate outcome. So maybe things aren't going to be as bad as we thought they were going to be. So when I add all of this stuff together, I look at an Earth that is forcing our hand, and I see a monumental shift in the way that people are thinking. as I mentioned earlier, the mere fact we're having this conversation now, we would never have had this conversation 10 years ago. These conversations are being had by all conservationists globally right now, beginning to figure this out. And members of the public I speak to are also thinking the same way. And so I think over the coming few years, I'm pretty optimistic that there's going to be over half of the world's population are going to be wanting to behave in this way. So their intent to change their behavior, and I think this is really important, will be authentic. Mm-hmm. And that authenticity will be because it is something that they believe they know, Marti, how to do, because it is consistent with their culture. So I interviewed about 30 fishers the other day. It was a very tough meeting. They were lovely people, but really hard-nosed. And they, not once did they really talk about wanting to catch fish. It was mentioned briefly at the beginning, but the rest of the hour and a half was about how do we restore our club's sense of community. And they came up with ideas for us, which we're hoping are going to form part of a plan. So I think already you've got some of the most hunters who'd be considered to be, maybe right-wing, not particularly environmentally savvy, people who are reflecting broadly an enormous sense of cultural intent to protect their local environment. And I think if you can find it there, it is everywhere now. Yeah. And so all we've got to do as a society is unlock that. In fact, I've said to my colleagues, the biggest thing we can do is to actually not go to the conservation groups, but to canvass. I think we've done this very well in this project, is canvass the general public and reveal those trends within the whole community. And it's remarkable how strong it is. And I would challenge anyone not to find that in every single community in the world, irrespective of political motivations. It is, everybody has a sense of their own community. I just spent a couple of weeks in Fiji with a group of about 30 people, and we were out on a remote part of the Northern Division, and we went out on a boat back to the Rainbow Reefs one day, and we found 2 sperm whales. I haven't seen sperm whales for 10 years, and they are literally the most remarkable animal on Earth. For a couple of primary reasons, which I described to the guests, is that they're the only animal on planet Earth that has a planetary home range. So the male's mitochondrial DNA is shared between ocean basins, which means that they move between oceans. And so human beings' natural home range is only a small area. My grandfather, apart from going to the war, barely left the village he lived in, the valley he lived in. Okay, so it would have been probably about a similar kind of 5 miles radius. And so humans act at that spatial scale, going back to what I described at the start. We concentrate, transfer, and amplify nutrients naturally on a 5 mile radius scale, whereas sperm whales do it on a planet-wide scale, at least 50% of the planet. Yeah. We can't exist without that. We have to have every animal acting synchronously at all those scales to kind of gradually build up the piles of energy to a point that people like humans can actually, or animals like humans can actually survive. So that's remarkable. It's a remarkably precise number. It's really interesting. And I also wonder if that has something to do with how far we can hear, because we can probably hear bird song at a 5 mile radius. We can probably, I said to my kids once, if you understand a little bit about bird song and you ever get lost in the forest, you'll be able to find water.
That is great. Well, Simon, we are coming to the close of our time with you today, which means...
That's a shame. I could speak to you guys for hours.
Yeah, likewise.
It is time to sit back, put your feet up, maybe grab a hot or cold beverage and listen to Marti's segment, Potentialities.
Potentialities. Potentialities.
So I'm going to take us on a little journey today, and we're going to journey a little bit with Joseph Campbell. But it's not the hero's journey. Forget that. We're going to embark on a journey of awe. So when Todd and I began our potentialities segment a few months ago, we spoke about the meaning of that word, potentiality. And I looked it up again today. The Cambridge Dictionary says potentiality is an inherent capacity for development, achievement, or success that is natural or has not yet been used. And that's what I want to explore with all of you today. Inherent human capacities that are loaded with potentiality, and especially the most powerful one, which is our capacity for awe. It's a grand capacity for development, achievement, and success that we're not using. But it might be key to everything. Now, you've probably been awestruck a few times in your life, and you've probably discovered that it's hard to describe that experience afterwards. But I'm going to tell you that's a good thing. Because when we're in the full feeling experience of something, we don't need to describe it. That full feeling experience means we are knowing everything completely. We are experiencing all the detail through our senses. We're being informed by the amazing world we're part of. And we are intended, as we've been discussing today, we are intended to use that wisdom of awe to guide our behaviors. But, in spite of ourselves and how we're wired as humans, we do try to describe those awe-filled moments. And in doing so, we always find that we lose the experience itself. We discover that the experience of awe lives in the felt sense of the moment, and it's bigger than any words can capture. And it changes us somehow that we can't describe. I mean, you've probably heard yourself say, "Oh, I don't have words for this." And then you have felt the power of the experience itself drift away as you continue to search for familiar words to describe a totally new and unfamiliar moment. That effort to find language pulling you away from the potentiality of awe. Well, you could ask, so what's wrong with that? Except we might end up feeling a little disappointed. And you might ask, what's the point of awe? Except that it's a kind of cool to experience it once in a while. Well, today we're going to consult with Joseph Campbell and take a little journey with him. He had a lot to say about awe. But as I said, we're not going on the hero's journey. That's an isolated journey, a battle against forces. Instead, we're going on a journey of awe to discover its power, to join with its power. We're going to talk about its role in human consciousness, and we're hopefully going to find out how to stop cutting ourselves off from it. Now, Joseph Campbell said, awe is what moves us forward. So think about a moment you've been awestruck. Yeah. My sense is he actually means awe is the journey, especially for humans. If you could stay in that moment of awe, who would you be then? Yeah. But I wonder if it's that simple. So I'm diving back into the dictionary here and looking at the root of that word awe, A-W-E. And if we go back to Latin and Greek, we find words meaning both uplifting joy and fear and dread. The roots of awe are both joyous and terrifying. Now, we've done that with a lot of words in the English language. We've flipped their meaning through the ages. The word myth is my favorite example. It originally meant the true story of a people, a record of what actually occurred. And now myth means it's just a story, something we made up or stylized. But, when we have a word that carries opposite meanings simultaneously, we need to pay attention. And why am I saying this? Because it has everything to do with how we modern humans tend to use our awareness to cut ourselves off from awe. And that means it has everything to do with the level of consciousness we're living in and the degree of awe we have access to. So here's Joseph again. We are so engaged in doing things to achieve purposes of outer value that we forget the inner value. We forget the rapture that is associated with being alive. And that rapture is what it's all about. Now, you've all heard me, if you've been listening, you've heard me talk about our modern propensity to live in a linear dimension of consciousness. And what I mean by this is that we tend to be aware of the world solely through our brain's linear functioning. This function, it's a late evolutionary gift. It resides in a very, very, very small part of our brain, which developed in order to serve our rapidly evolving creative genius, our relational intelligence. And the relational function of the brain is to take in all of the sensory data of the world around us. We actually take it in, we store it, we tag it, we bring it back up and combine it and cross-reference it and study it, and we create from it. We create new meaning, new ideas, new gadgets, new maps of action from all that input. And we even create language from that sensory input. And we may not be aware of this, but we literally know the world through our senses, through experience, not through language, not through thinking. Those are all outcomes. Now, I want to spend a little time with this because this is critical. We developed that linear portion so we could put our maps of action to work in the world. In other words, we needed a way to go from A to B to C and sometimes back again without getting distracted or lost or eaten on the way. You have to think about humans. Gradually, as we developed, we stood up, we could see farther, we started using our beautiful opposable thumbs, our slanty foreheads became vertical because our brains were growing. We're collecting and storing and using a lot more information, and we needed a little piece to help us pick some of that information and do something with it. That's that linear portion. And that linear portion, it also allows us to sing out loud, to speak that language that our relational intelligence is developing. The elders tell us that we developed language as humans so we can share our dreams, not so we can reason ourselves out of opportunity. Now, the catch to this little amazing gift of the linear mind, the one that puts those maps of action to work, allows us to speak poetry and all that stuff. The catch is it's not wired directly to the world around us. It's only wired to that genius part of our brain that's creating stuff all the time. So if we're only aware in the linear, we're actually unable to recognize new input. It might show up and surprise us and we throw it out. If we're only aware in the linear, we don't know anything directly. We have to think about it and reason our way there. It's very difficult. If we're only aware in the linear, our context is our history, what has already occurred. And our limbic fear circuit becomes the judge of meaning. And it becomes nearly impossible to recognize anything new, let alone anything awesome, let alone be moved forward by life itself. So what I'm saying here is, for today, the most important fact, maybe for all the days to come, the most important fact here is that that linear part of our brains where most of our awareness is sitting is not the part of us that experiences awe. It's just the part that follows instructions that have already been created. It's the doing center. And if we think we're going to go out in the world and we have to make the world better by doing, we're trapping our awareness in that linear part that cannot experience awe. And we've come to value that linear part, overvalue that linear part. And we pay too much attention to doing. And so the ego and the limbic fear circuit gets so much of our awareness, they pull us in all the way. And we get kind of trapped in a linear dimension. It's only 2 dimensions in there. And we are at risk of misinterpreting the enormous power of awe as something terrible and lethal. And this is why we have 2 definitions to that word. uplifting joy versus fear and dread. If we're in what I'm going to call loosely full consciousness, we get momentum and uplift for growth when we experience awe. If we're in limited linear consciousness and something awesome happens to us, we get dread and fear and pulling back. Now, at one point in human history, we actually understood awe as a core force of life, a positive force of life. We knew it was the power that awakens our essence as a species, igniting the timeless memory of our place in the big system of life, bringing to life our natural patterns of participation and connection. Why do you think we have places like Stonehenge and all the incredible ancient sites where humans went to experience the connection of our planet to the sun and the stars and the whole universe for awe? But we have now, losing connection to awe, we have control and isolation dominating our human behavior. And we have a distinct inability to recognize awe, let alone experience it. When we started to value thinking and writing and reasoning thousands of years ago, we value that more than direct experience. We began losing our ability to know the world through our sensing intelligence. And so we began losing our capacity to thrive by being in relationship with larger powers of creation. We began losing awe as an evolutionary force that acts on our behalf. And we started to control that which we could no longer experience directly. But even if you're trapped in that small linear world, you can still be awestruck. It's just you won't be able to explain it to yourself. And you'll probably try to quiet down the charge of that experience with explanations and hopefully the elixir of logic. But awe defies all of that. It defies explanation. It defies logic. It demands that you be in the experience. So here I have to add something to Joseph Campbell's statement. Awe moves us forward if we're connected to the natural world we belong to. If we are capable of being fully aware in the sensing experience of life. The experience of awe quantum leaps us into a dimension of consciousness that drives participatory behavior. Awe changes us into the people we're looking to be. And that quantum leap, it reignites our natural, respectful relationship with all the larger powers of nature. It brings forward that timeless memory of humanity's role in the big scheme of things as stewards, creative stewards of evolutionary thriving. So we get to awe through experience, not through thinking and doing. So human experience matters. Your experience matters. The way we be and relate to the natural world around us, much more than human thinking and reasoning, much more than human doing. We need to remember ourselves. Again, we're not on our journey to save the world, save ourselves. But in that, you do save the world. The influence vitalizes the world. Now, there's yet another course, because humans are not simple creatures. The trick is not only to seek out experiences of awe, get yourselves out there, do something you've never done before, be in nature, right? The trick is not to just seek that out, but to teach yourself to use the power of its uplift for creativity and deeper connectivity, for being new. And to teach yourself not to come crashing back into the linear world whose limits you have become so accustomed to. So this journey into awe is actually pretty easy, but it's not linear. So here are just some suggestions, some little things that you can do to have a big experience. Try germinating a plant seed in a paper cup full of good soil. Try tending that plant to its best fruition, not yours, its best fruition. Try transplanting it into nature, into a different context. Be in the awesome experience of being taught by your seedling. Or dedicate yourself to watching where the sun rises on your nearest horizon and track its rising point from solstice to solstice. And let yourself be awed by the spirit and power of light on the move. Or watch the night sky through one night and let yourself be awed by planetary motion. Or even find a video of a pod of dolphins leaping in the surf. And instead of just looking at it, feel what you're looking at. And then tell me how it changes you. Take small steps to awaken that big power within yourself and see how it changes your behaviors, your respect for your neighbors and your planet and yourself, how it enriches your life and all of life around you. Joseph Campbell leaves us with this timeless wisdom about our required journey into awe. The goal of life is to make your heartbeat match the beat of the universe, to match your nature with nature. Please seek this out and experience the awe.
Wow, Marti. That was awesome. It really was. I've got chills down my spine and my arms.
I'm a bit speechless.
Yeah,
Speechless.
perfect.
I'm a bit awestruck by what you just described, Marti.
Thank you. Thank you. So I really appreciate that. And I appreciate the opportunity to share that delivery with everyone. And now we have another wonderful segment. It's time for our takeaways. So Todd, what takeaway do you want to offer our listeners today?
First, bar-tailed godwits, sperm whales. I had to say bar-tailed godwits because Simon talks about them in his book, and it's such a fun name. But I'm hungry for more animal stories and animal experiences, so that's part of it. The second thing I'm going to say is music, sex, and food are part of nature. I was really feeling that as Marti was reading her piece on awe, that an experience of live music when I have looked around the room and we have this recognition that we are having this amazing experience and no words can capture it, an amazing live music, or looking into my beloved's eyes in the bedroom, or having a great meal with people I care about when there's silence when you put down your fork. Just really this sense that we are nature, that is nature too, and that is all part of awakening. Simon, what takeaways do you have for us?
Oh God, where do I start? One of the things that happens very often when I travel with people is that they get obsessed with naming fish. And I always have a laugh with them because inevitably someone comes up and goes, "Here's a photo of a fish I took. Do you know what fish it is?" And I go, "It's the charismatic umpala." And they said, "Is it?" I say, "No." And they look confused. And I go, "Does it matter what I call it?" I said, "Would you remember tomorrow?" And they went, "No, probably not." I said, "So what was it doing?" And I said, "So next time you see a fish and you're snorkeling," I said, "why don't you just watch what it's doing and just marvel in it for a while?" But I've kind of taken that, I want to take that a step further because after our sperm whale encounter, Todd, I found myself sitting in Fiji airport surrounded by the hustle and bustle of Pacific flyers everywhere and people arguing and shouting and being drunk. And all I could do was sit and think about what these sperm whales were doing. And I think it's one of the most remarkable things is that I often sit there and I go, I wonder what that animal was doing that I saw yesterday. Because they're still doing what they're doing, right? And we kind of forget about them, but they're this incredible machinery of the world. And last night I was at the gorgeous film premiere of Message of the Lyrebirds, made by friends of mine, and the amazing cameraman Nick Hayward, who's filmed the BBC Lyrebird sequence at Attenborough, spent 15 years making this film with the local community, and he spent months in the forest with lyrebirds. And he said that it came a point where he started to dream about lyrebirds. I think if you can get yourself to the point where you're dreaming about wildlife, which happens to me all the time. Like, I'll go to sleep with images of nudibranchs in my head after diving and things. Then I think you're there. But stop and just, as you say, my just marvel. Don't worry about naming things. That's linear thought. Just marvel in it. But maybe just now and again, have a think about what that thing you saw might be doing still. It still exists. It's still out there, getting on with its life. And it's doing something good for the world.
Excellent. Marti, takeaways.
Oh, I'm like Simon. I'm full of extraordinary takeaways, but what keeps pulsing inside me now, Simon, is your understanding of the difference between plants and animals. And I keep thinking, humans, we need to remember that we're animals. We really do. And we need to really feel into where we're carrying our intelligence and how we're planting the seeds of our knowledge and how we move energy around. We have an impact that we don't pay any attention to.
Superpowers, Marti. We have superpowers, literally.
Yeah, exactly. And just the way you talk about it, I want everyone to read your books and really feel their way into it because it's life-changing. So I really thank you for that, Simon.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
Thank you, Simon and Marti. And thank you to our listeners for joining us today here at Leading from Being. We look forward to continuing our landscape series, and we'd love to hear from you. Send us a note at leadingfrombeing.com. Until next time.
Yes, until next time. Thank you, Todd, and thank you, Simon.
Thank you for listening to Leading from Being. You can learn more at leadingfrombeing.com, including contact information for Marti and Todd. Our theme song is courtesy of Cloud Cult.